Thank you for joining us today. I'm Linda Fegler, Senior Editor of Ohio Magazine, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Real People, Real Stories. I'm proud to introduce our two authors who indeed have riveting stories to share, Jeni Bauer and Nancy Petro. Thank you so much for joining us today. Entrepreneur, best-selling author, and James Beard Award-winning Jeni Bauer started making ice cream in 1996 and has spent 15 years perfecting her craft and building a community of devotees who scan her website, blog, Facebook page, and Twitter feed daily for what is sure to be their next addiction. Her creative, innovative, and nuanced recipes are inspired by the ingredients available any given day at the market. At Jeni's, everything is made by hand and in-house. They even handwrite the name of the ice cream on every pint. There are currently 8 stores in Central Ohio, 1 in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, and 1 in Nashville, Tennessee, as well as clients throughout the country. Jeni also has a thriving mail-order business, and Jeni's Splendid Ice Creams at Home is her first cookbook. Thank you for being here, Jeni. Nancy Petro, also of Franklin County, is the author of False Justice, 8 Myths That Convict the Innocent. Nancy, a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Denison University, has more than 35 years of full-time experience in marketing, publishing, and business management. She played an active role in the political career of her husband, former Ohio Attorney General Jim Petro. She shares Jim's unsettling awakening to the issue of wrongful conviction and worked with him for 2.5 years on the book, False Justice, 8 Myths That Convict the Innocent. She continues advocacy of that book with a focus on increasing awareness of wrongful conviction and the importance of criminal justice reform. Nancy is a Tiffin, Ohio native and currently makes her home in Columbus. Thank you for being here, Nancy.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to start out with actually both of your stories. If we could start with Jeni. Why ice cream? Of course, the answer might be why not, but if you could talk a little bit about yourself.
Well, I started making ice cream when I was in art school. Actually, I was studying art and art history at Ohio State. And I was thinking about maybe going to pastry school, and so I started making pastries at home, and ice cream was like the second thing that I made. The first thing I did was, the first ice cream flavor that I made was a cayenne and chocolate, but I knew nothing about the history of the Aztecs and the Mayas, and all was beautiful with stories behind hot chocolate. I just thought it was a cool thing to do, put some spice into ice cream so that it sort of, I put it on my tongue, it was cold, it tasted like chocolate, and then about 3 seconds later it burst into flames. And so from that moment on, and I sometimes think of my life as moments that are these really important moments that sort of set you, your course. That was the big moment for me, and I got hooked on ice cream. So then after that, I was at Shop the North Market for all of my ingredients, and started my first business, Scream, 6 months later at the North Market, and just started making ice cream out of the ingredients that were in the North Market, which is, the most beautiful ingredients in Columbus. And I still have a shop there today, and I'm still working with many of the same farmers that we worked with back then for our strawberries and blueberries and all of the ingredients that we get from Ohio.
Wonderful. Nancy, how did your passion for your cause ignite?
Well, I think it's interesting here that we're probably both authors that never envisioned ourselves writing books. I'm gonna guess, and that's certainly the truth with me. I've been the sidekick for my husband in political life now we've been married for almost 39 years. When Jim was the elected Ohio Attorney General, one of his initiatives was to try to make Ohio nation leading in the use of DNA to solve crimes. And he did a number of initiatives, including gaining authority from the legislature to take DNA from all of Ohio's felons, put them in the National Database of Crime Scene Evidence, biological, and kaboom, you have a lot of matches, and we solved a number of unbelievable cold cases. Central Ohioans remember the Stephanie Hummer case, Ohio co-ed, murdered, and that one was cold for 13 years, and just by entering that information in the database, it was solved. So that was great, but then one day he got a call that said, we've got DNA that excludes a man who's in prison in Ohio for life for killing his mother-in-law, raping his niece, and the DNA excludes him, and yet he's been through pretty much the appeals process and has not gotten any reversal or anything. And so, because Jim believed in the reliability of DNA, he looked at the case and he was stunned This is a fourth-decade lawyer who all of a sudden is learning something new that we really do sometimes convict totally innocent people. That was Clarence Elkins. And Clarence's wife knew that he hadn't killed her mother, and she wanted to find out who did. And it was an absolutely fascinating story that you couldn't make up, which is the first 30 pages or so of this book, but it was also our introduction to wrongful conviction. And I was just haunted by this. I mean, certain things, there's so many things to worry about in life, but this one really struck me. And so I'm sure that that was the context, but I will tell you that in the middle of the night one night, I was almost jarred awake with the notion that we had to write a book about this. And so I waited for Jim to wake up and said, guess what, we're writing a book. And he was surprised, but that's the beginning. And then we spent about 2.5 years working on it.
And I wanted to get into that. Can you both talk about your journey into the world of publishing? Because this is your first book for both of you, correct? Although yours is now going to be in German as well, right?
That's right. Yeah. I have the German version here. Right. I'm carrying it around because I got it in the mail yesterday.
Could you talk about that as being sort of new authors, certainly experts in your field, what that journey was like getting that book out from the idea of I'm going to do a book to seeing these books in front of you now? Can you start, Nancy, and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the grace of God, I have to, it's just amazing. It started out as this terrible research paper because really it was a vehicle to try to answer questions. And I had an opportunity to kind of, and it's no connections whatsoever. I actually got a book, someone gave me a book on thinking like your editor, which was written by an agent. And so I read the book and followed it. And, then I sent the proposal by email to the author of the book. And I said, I followed your rules. I did a proposal. Will you be my agent? And she got back and said, you did a great job. And no, I could never sell that book. And so, but she said, why don't you just send it to this publisher because he likes this kind of thing. And just tell him I sent it. So by email, I sent the proposal to Don Fair of Kaplan, who's the executive editor there. And he got back and said, I kind of like it, but we'd have to hire a real author, And I thought, it's not going to work. Nobody's going to be able to talk to my husband
that you have
this much. I can hardly find time to get it. So I thought, I better become a real writer, and I just redid it. And instead of third person, put it in first person. That changed everything, because you could talk about what people are thinking and feeling. And it just went a lot smoother, and I sent it back, the first 30 pages. And it took 8 weeks, so he sent an email, again, all email. Said, it's been a long slog, but I've shared it with everyone. We like your book a lot, and we'd like to buy it if you haven't sold it. And that was it. Okay. So it was a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale experience.
Congratulations. That's one. It's writing a book and getting it published is one of the hardest things you can do. There's all those stories out there about how it's so hard to get an agent, and then it's so hard just to get a publisher to listen to you.
I know.
For me, it started with Food and Wine magazine. I had made ice cream for many years and perfected our recipe, and it's not perfect, and I still work on that every day in my professional kitchen. But I think about ice cream, and I started as an aspiring artist, I would say. But I really have over the years become much, much more a dairy scientist than an artist. And that's where I spend all my time is working on that recipe. So when Food and Wine magazine called in, I think late 2006 or 7, they wanted recipes adapted for the home machine. And I was ready for the challenge because I had done this work for a long time in our professional business, and I knew that I could make a better recipe, one that was scoopable, that was at least better than the other recipes in the other home ice cream cookbooks that are out there. And so I was like, just give me about a month, let me try it. I had just had a baby, so it was perfect. I just put her on my back and stayed home, which I never stay home. That's just not me, But it was perfect timing, and so I spent at least a month. I did over 100 batches to try to get this recipe at least a little bit better than the one that was out there, a little closer to what I produce in my kitchen. And after about 100 batches, I sat down with my husband and tasted it, and it works because it's not about flavor. I mean, it's about the texture of the ice cream. It's about how it scoops, how it sits on a cone, how long it takes to lick it off on a hot day. And those are the things that I think about when I make ice cream, and that's what I wanted to achieve at home. So when I did it, and we published in Food and Wine magazine, the response was overwhelming. I mean, people were making it all over the country, all over the world, and emailing me, and that was how I got introduced to my agent. And then I started thinking about a book. I wouldn't have written the book if I didn't get that texture right, and I wouldn't have published in Food and Wine if the texture hadn't become
and that's a challenge
something that I wanted to put my name on.
As well, getting that recipe from batches and batches down to the home. I know we get a lot of recipes at Ohio magazine. Sometimes the chefs have to think, it's not as easy just saying one set of this, how many cups I'll whittle this down. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and ice cream is a very complex science. I mean,
and talk about that, if you
dairy.
Will, how complex that is.
Well, when I think of milk, I don't think of, or even ice cream, I don't think of milk, cream, vanilla. I think of milk proteins and how we work with milk proteins. I think of all the components of milk. That milk is 87% water. What does water become when it's frozen? Ice crystals. I think of sugar and how, on a molecular level, to connect all of those ingredients, all those components together so that they don't become ice crystals in the end, and so that they have elasticity. So I work with different sugars. It's how you cook the cream. And we do this at work too. The way that we pasteurize, low temperature batch pasteurization, makes smoother ice creams. So anyway, so that's what it's about. And I tried to keep the chapter on the craft, the science, short, because it wasn't in the beginning, but I wanted it to be very accessible, and that was the whole point. It was not meant to be this big sort of fussy book. It was meant to say, you don't have to know any of this stuff. You're going to have great ice cream at home, and you don't have to follow my flavors. You can do whatever you want in flavors, but you're going to get great textured ice cream on your machines.
Well, you touched on it a bit, Jenny, but can you both talk about the challenge in sitting down and really writing what is your first book, and how the creative process worked for you? Nancy, do you want to start that?
Well, I've never had a writing course. I never went to a writing seminar. And I had friends who knew that I wanted to write this book and say, come with us, come to the writing seminar, come, we've got a group of authors, and nothing against it, but I just thought, I just have to write it. I can't keep talking about writing it, I can't keep thinking about writing it, I just have to sit down and write it. And so every day, and then especially then when we had a deadline, I realized I've got a job to do, and I would just sit down, and I don't think I didn't wait for the mood or anything like that. And a lot of this was research. The writing part was the fun part. It's not that I don't like research, but there was quite a bit to do. And I say that ultimately, I tried to make it a narrative of stories, that people would be pulled through the book by the stories. But I also wanted to weave in, everything we'd learned looking into this, because it was astonishing. It was shocking. And so there are two threads. And so that, but to do it, you just sit down every day and you work.
Can you talk about some of the places your research took you, and sort of how you put your thoughts in order as you did this?
That's a very good point. I don't know that there was any methodology to it, but the book, in addition to, it covers 3 Ohio cases of wrongful conviction. So for that, I read all the transcripts, all the appeals, everything that, medical, anything I could get my hands on for those 3 cases. All 3 of them were championed by an investigative journalist. So there was a lot of newspaper information on all of them. Jim personally touched each case in one way or the other. In the first one, he was drawn in by the Ohio Innocence Project to try to do something. In the second one, he was the Attorney General who was on the other side of the petition to get compensation for Michael Green, who had spent 13 years in prison, being wrongfully convicted. And his job as Attorney General was to represent the taxpayers and to try to keep this fair. And the third one was, he was drawn in to be, after his Attorney General, being pro bono attorney for an Innocence Project case, in a case that had no DNA. And just what went on with that. In your mind, you do want to be sure that this person is innocent before you commit yourself to that sort of thing. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I tried to read every available piece of information about these cases. And then they're not the only ones either. Then there are other cases that illustrate what we call the 8 myths, That's the last 25 pages of the book, and those are illustrated by quite a bit of factual information as well.